Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Establish an Organizational Culture that Supports Your DEI Initiatives. For those who are returning Candid webinar participants, a warm welcome back. And to those who are here for the first time, I'm glad you're joining us today. My name is Ebony Carroll, Network Engagement Assistant for Candid based in Atlanta, and I am joined by Yvonne Sims, Network Engagement Manager, also based in Atlanta. We will be supporting today's webinar behind the scenes, as well as collecting questions you ask along the way and posing them during the Q&A. I would like to turn the controls over to our speaker today. As she takes the reins, I'd like to introduce her. Rachel Wyley is the founder and CEO of Culture Kinesis, a coaching firm that supports individuals and organizations to do the work of cultural reimagination. Rachel began her nonprofit career as an educator in East Oakland, an experience that cemented her commitment and love of community. Before launching Culture Kinesis, she served as an executive director for 2 Bay Area nonprofit organizations where she led regional fundraising, managed racially and experimentally diverse boards, and empowered teams to achieve critical outcomes for communities. Rachel attributes her success in both arenas to preliminary investment and envisioning and installing a legacy-oriented culture. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Rachel.
Thank you so much, Ebony. Community, I couldn't be more excited to be with you all today. My name is Rachel Wyley. I am the CEO and founder of Culture Kinesis. And again, I'm so thrilled to be here with you. I can't see you, but I know that you're there, and I'm excited for us to have this conversation together today. First thing that I want to share with you was that I began my career, again, just to help you understand who I am and what I bring to this conversation. I began my career as an entry-level teaching fellow and moved up year over year to become a nonprofit executive director. And I occupied a couple different program roles and moved into fundraising and ended my career in nonprofit and fundraising. I like to joke with people in a very kind of abrupt and interesting way. I moved from being a program director into an executive director seat. Not necessarily something I would recommend. If you're thinking about making a shift like that, I would love for you to schedule time with me and talk to me so we can talk about how to make sure you get the support that you need in that transition. But that's what I bring to this work. That's the perspective that I bring, both a program and also a fundraising perspective. I want to also share that I feel extremely fortunate to have grown up, I say, in nonprofit professionally. And I also, very honestly, culture work requires a lot of honesty. So you're going to hear me being very frank a lot of times. Very honestly, nonprofit has broken my heart a couple times. And so I also bring that to this work and that to this conversation. I feel as though transitioning into fundraising allowed me to be able to see behind the curtain in some aspect and start to ask a lot of really important questions about how do we create culture, who informs culture, and what does having a positive and impactful culture afford to both us and organizations, but also for communities. I now operate in a different space, but I still hold that same line of culture as paramount, and I'm excited to talk with you all about that today. So as you know, today's conversation is about establishing an organizational culture that supports your DEI initiatives. I'm really grateful, as I said, that you're here today, and I want to make sure that we do a little bit of level setting before we dive all the way in. So the first thing I want to share is that really no matter what corner of nonprofit or even the corporate sector perhaps that you come from, you're in the right place. I'm going to speak, of course, from my perspective. I'm going to speak about the experiences that I've had. And I want you to know there's a thread that runs through all of these things relative to culture. So even as I might be speaking about something that doesn't directly connect to your experience, I promise you there's something in there for you. So I hope that you'll look for it and hold to it. Second thing is, we're going to be talking about throughout this conversation power in some aspect. And what I want to invite you to think about is not only do people come from different corners of this work, there's also folks coming from different kind of positions of positional power, for lack of a better way to explain that. And when I say positional power, what I'm talking about is what role you have in an organization and what level of power and influence that affords you. It's important to say this because I want folks who come to this conversation with a limited, perhaps, level of positional power to understand you're in the right place. I'm celebrating you for being here, and I want you to hold on to as much as you can. And a lot of the wisdom is going to come, frankly, from you as I ask you questions about your organization and what culture looks like in that space. I want you to remember that even if you have limited power, learning and taking in and thinking through how you'd like things to be, there will be a moment where you can step into more power, and I want you to be prepared when that moment comes. For those of you that have more positional power, I'd like for you to think about that in a different way. I'd like for you to think about the way in which the power that you have comes with great responsibility. And so how can you keep in mind as you exercise your power, not just what you would like to see and what's important to you as you build culture, but also how do you keep in mind the folks that have less positional power than you and represent them as you're thinking about how to move culture forward. So very quickly, and then I'm going to go to the next slide because I'm sure you're tired of looking at this one. We're going to be here for just another second. You can see at the bottom of the slide under the title of the session, Culture Kinesis logo and our tagline. Let me start with the tagline. So Culture Kinesis is about liberating leadership. And that focus has to do with the reality that just like culture is everywhere, there are infinite opportunities to be a leader. I want to encourage people through building culture, through empowering themselves and others to really think about what it looks like to be the most liberated leader possible. The other thing I'd like to draw your attention to is that if you couldn't tell, and if you couldn't tell, don't tell me, because I hope that people can tell this, that Culture Kinesis logo is a dandelion. The reason for that, there's a much deeper explanation that I will spare you today, but the reason for that is we talk a lot about in Culture Kinesis land, the way in which this work is about encouraging weeds and planting weeds in the gardens of cultivated plants. So I want us to really think about the way in which you have to sprout new ideas in places sometimes where they're not welcome, but they're necessary. Even when you're called a weed, it is still critical for you to be in that space. So team, my goal overall today is that you exit this session with an abundance of new, deep thoughts that you can start to share and that others can help you make sense of on your team. That's my hope. Now, as it relates to our specified objectives for this training, upon completion of this conversation, you should be able to, 1, explain the key steps to establishing an organizational cultural bottom line. Number 2, outline 2 to 3 exploratory questions to guide your process of cultural interrogation and reimagination. And then 3, construct a working legacy statement for your organization. Our agenda, so how we'll spend our time today is as follows. We're doing our welcome right now. We're going to spend some time also setting the cultural stage. Again, culture isn't everything. We need to be thinking about it in that way. We're going to spend some time reflecting and interrogating your current culture at your organization. I promise you, even if you don't feel like your organization has a culture, every single organization has a culture. We're going to talk more in a second about what it might look like for that culture to be unspoken or spoken, but every single organization has a culture. We will also do some work to engage with foundational questions that help us get to the root of what that culture is and help you to excavate what it is, what lies beneath the surface. We're going to do some application by drafting a legacy statement for your organization. We'll get some practice in, as is always necessary, by drafting your organization's cultural bottom line. I want to put some emphasis on that word draft. We're not going to complete it necessarily today because we have a finite amount of time, but we're going to start the process. All of these things are simply a beginning. I want you to remember to leave this session feeling empowered, excited, and accomplished, even though you're going to leave likely with more questions and answers, even though you will likely leave with things undone. This is the process of culture building. It's not seamed up, it's not sewed up in one session. It takes time, and so we're going to practice that today. We then will end with a question and answer session. Okay. Community, I also would like for you to think about 3 key messages. There's a lot that I'm going to hand you today. You're not going to hold on to all of it. That's not possible. But I want you to hold on to 3 specific things if you can. And then other things will just be a bonus for you. The first key message I'd like for you to hold to, you must interrogate your current culture to set a vision for your future culture. From where I sit, it is not possible for you to set a vision for where you're going if you do not do the work, which can sometimes be infinitely difficult, immensely hard. if you do not do the work to interrogate where you are currently. The second key message I'd like you to hold on to is that a cultural bottom line establishes a framework that becomes the vision of success for your organization's cultural reimagination process. We need to be able to create a container around the work that we're doing so that we can actually do this work that can be very pleasant, but also challenging around identifying how we want to reimagine the culture that we have at our organization. Third key message, last key message, legacy orientation, literally thinking about legacy, being grounded in legacy, holds you accountable to cultural impact that extends beyond your organization. A lot of times when we're talking about culture, we're not necessarily grounded in the fact that culture is larger than us. Whether you are on this call as a nonprofit representative or someone who works at a foundation perhaps, I want you to feel empowered by, but also take really seriously that what you do every day, the narratives that you forward, the narratives that you don't forward, etc., are things that contribute to culture, not just in your workplace, not just on your team, but in the larger sector. So let me share this with you really quickly. This slide is not the focus of our conversation today. It is, however, the focus of the article that I was asked to write that's up on Candid's blog right now. The reason I'm bringing it up is because I'm partial to the article. I thought it was good, so I'd love for you to read it. And I think that it's a good continuation of the conversation that we're having today because, of course, we can't have the entire conversation. There's an underlying question to all that we're talking about today. And that question is, why must cultural reimagination, which you've heard me say a couple different times, this is what Culture Kinesis' goal is, why must cultural reimagination precede DEI initiatives? There are three reasons for that from where I sit. The first is that the process of cultural reimagination necessitates a willingness to unlearn. When we do not have unlearning present in our DEI work, we stack those liberatory things that we're attempting to do on top of the status quo. Now, from outset, that may not seem like a problem, but what we have to remember is that when things are entrenched and they haven't been dislodged, we know this, we've seen this in various spaces, they come back. And so we have to do the difficult work of unlearning, of dislodging, so that when we place something back in that space, it has room to take root. Second piece, cultural reimagination requires bedrock level alteration. The foundation that we build underneath anything matters tremendously. We know this too from our personal lives. We know this from just being living beings. We have to be deeply intentional about what the foundation is upon which we build new cultures. Last, cultural reimagination builds endurance. This is one of the most important things that I tell folks and that I really deeply want them to hold to. When we're talking about cultures that we deem toxic, that we say are not, do not promote equity, do not promote inclusion, we have to understand that within our society, those cultures are centuries entrenched. They did not get here recently. They've had a lot of time to develop roots and to get really, really deep into the soil of our society and of our consciousness. So knowing that we're up against that, part of what I want us to remember is that DEI work is forever work. We will always likely be doing this work. So it's important that we are in the right shape to do it and that we understand that it's a long game so that we can do the work little by little by little to actually allow for these countercultures to take root in the way we want them to. Very quickly, we're about to jump into these specific things that are aligned with our objectives, but the level setting is important. So thank you for your patience and bearing with me. The approach that Culture Kinesis takes to culture coaching is four-part. We rebuild intentional community. We do the work to engage in critical unlearning, or we guide folks, to do the work to engage in critical unlearning. We embrace radical reeducation. And then we guide you through a process of beginning that active cultural reimagination process. These steps are critical. So when we talk about what type of organizational culture needs to exist to help cement your DEI initiatives, I'm talking about these specific things. I worry a lot of times that if these steps are skipped, that we get to a place where we're establishing DEI related measures, efforts, committees, structures, infrastructure, without being super clear about what the culture is that we imagine in the first place. So these are the key steps that we take. We'll get a taste of a lot of those today. Very, very quickly, I want to offer you some things in the spirit of the way in which a conversation about DEI, a conversation about culture building can feel very big and very daunting a lot of times. And so what I like to do with folks is share with communities is share, there are small things a lot of times that we can do to really move forward this piece that I mentioned before about either rebuilding or building intentional community. Sometimes the efforts that you make, especially up front, don't have to be massive. They just have to be intentional. So 2 examples of that for you just very quickly. This is a framework that I use very often. You may have heard this talked about as community agreements, ways of working, etc. I choose in Culture Kinesis to call them cultural tenets, and they are the container that I build around the folks that are engaged in a particular conversation. Now, because you and I are not technically in conversation, this does not apply to what we're talking about here. I'm sharing this as a model, as a tool that you are welcome to use. Again, as a small step you can take to make sure that everyone feels grounded in the culture that you're working toward. I'd like to point out 2 of these just because I think that they may be less apparent in terms of what they mean than some of the others. So the first one I'd like to point out, again, this is because you may choose to borrow these, you're welcome to do it. I encourage you to do it. That 4th bullet point talks about practicing active witnessing. That used to say practice active listening, and I changed it at some point because to me, to listen is one thing. That's important, that's beautiful. Listening and witnessing sit very opposite each other for me. Not opposite, they're related, but they're different in terms of degree. If I'm called to be a witness for somebody, I might be called to testify, I might be asked to speak on their behalf. That is a different type of engagement than simply being a listener. One example. Second example is the 3rd from the bottom, where I share space to fumble, responsibility to repair. This one is key because oftentimes when we're having culture conversations, we can make choices throughout the entire process. We can make choices to be exceedingly honest about things that we're feeling, beliefs that we hold, and we can make choices to not be as honest. That's always our choice. If we make choices to be honest, which I ultimately encourage, when we make choices to be honest, there are always going to be situations where we may fumble. We may say something that comes from a place of deep honesty from us that has an impact on somebody else. Our responsibility in that moment is to recognize that we've negatively impacted someone perhaps, and then take our responsibility to do whatever repair is necessary. So again, these do not apply to our particular conversation or our particular engagement today, but it's a resource for you. Second resource, and then we're going to jump into our cultural bottom line conversation, is conceptual alignment. So I like to do my absolute best to make sure that when I'm having conversations in community, I do the work up front to say, here are some concepts that I'm going to be using throughout this conversation. I'd like you to know what I mean when I say X. And so I've done that for you here and outlined all the different terms that I will use in this conversation that we may not fully agree on what they mean. I want you to be clear about what I mean. And so an example here, DEI, I can assume that everyone knows what that means. If you do not, you shouldn't feel badly about it. That's why this is here. DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. I've also added another component, DEI plus all related permutations. So I know that in various workspaces, some people use JEDI, some people say DNI, some people say EDI. I want you to know that when I say DEI, I'm talking about most of those other permutations. Let me take a pause and give you just a couple seconds to take these in so that, again, you understand what I'm talking about when I use these terms throughout our time together today. Okay, community, let's get it. Let's get into it. First thing I want to share with you all is, as promised, we're going to be having a conversation about what it looks like and what it means to establish a cultural bottom line. And so when I say that, what I mean is what we bring in as an organization, if we're talking about this in terms of revenue, as we typically do, what we tend to bring in as an organization, what we expend, what revenue we're spending, that equals our net profit. Now, it's worth saying this because folks who have seen me in other spaces and heard me speak before will know this. I'm very clear that capitalism and equity are not bedfellows. You're welcome to arm wrestle me on that. I would love to hear from you if you fundamentally disagree. That's where I sit, and I approach a lot of our cultural conversations from that place. I also very much believe in the reality that when we're trying to reimagine something, we sometimes have to use what is familiar and what we know as a springboard to a new way of thinking. And so this concept of net profit is something that I think is simple enough. Most of us can access it. Most of us have heard it before. And if you haven't, again, that's okay. There's no shame in that. We're going to walk through it. You also may not have expected to come and do math. I promise you this is not precise math, but it's a way to think about relationships and to think about motion within this conversation of culture. And so, as I said, when we think about a bottom line relative to revenue, we're talking about what we bring in as an organization, what we expend as an organization, and then that equals a hopefully net profit. It gives us a net something. Now, if you bring in more than you spend, you will end up in a net positive place. If you bring in exactly the same amount as what you spend, you will end up in a net neutral place. If you, however, bring in less than what you spend, you will end up in a net negative space. Now, here's what I want to present to you, or a thought that I want to give you. As a leader, right, as somebody who's making decisions about culture within a space, if I'm thinking about bottom line, and I find, again, relative to revenue, if I find that our net profit is not where I want it to be, I have some choices. I've been in that seat before, and so I want to talk you through how I approached it. I would say, okay, so this number is not what I want to see. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to set a new vision for this because I want this number to look different. I'm going to devise a new strategy. I'm going to invest my team in that new strategy, so on and so forth. But I'm going to do whatever I need to do to make sure that that net number is positive, is that it's what I want to see. So here's my question for you all. This is now time for the poll. If you were to guess your organization's net profit at this moment, where would you place it? Would you place it at net negative, net neutral, or net positive? And let me be really clear, I'm not talking about revenue at your organization. I'm talking about your culture. Where would you place it? Net negative, net neutral, net positive?
Unfortunately, I think we can't relaunch it. So
Okay.
That's why there's no answer. So if you guys want, you can go ahead and just put it in the chat and I'll just start saying it out. Not seeing a whole lot of positives, but definitely neutrals and negatives. That work for you?
It works for me. That's perfect.
All
I
right.
appreciate it. And what I want you to know is that there's no right answer to that conversation or to that question. This entire conversation is about asking questions and then being able to give yourself the time to really sit in and think about, how does that relate to my culture? What does that tell me about my organization's culture? It's not wrong to be in any one of those three categories. It just is. But the reason I ask you that question is because that's your first opportunity to really stop and assess. Where do you think you are? You may find yourself saying something very different at the end of this conversation. That's great. What I want to celebrate is that it doesn't seem like we have a shortage of folks who are willing to be honest about where they feel like their organization is at. That's so critical. And my hope is that even if you were somebody who wrote in that you feel like your culture is at a net negative, that you celebrate your ability to be able to be honest and say, we are not where we want to be. That is a critical first step. I always tell my clients, if we're not honest from jump, we will end up right back here. And so the best way that we make sure that we don't end up back at square one is to be honest from the beginning. Thank you so much for participating in that makeshift poll. So continuing the conversation about what we mean when we say a cultural bottom line, again, in summary, a revenue bottom line is what an organization wants the net from all of its expenditures and revenue to be. By comparison, I think of a cultural bottom line as what an organization wants the net from all of its inputs and its cultural inputs and cultural trade-offs to be. Now, there are 5 steps that I tend to use to support folks to establish a cultural bottom line. CBL is not actually an official acronym. I just needed to take up less space in the title. You can call it whatever you want to. 5 steps. The first step, interrogate and then name your current organizational culture. Now, that statement alone may cause some people to be shaking in their boots. I promise you we're going to do it together. It's all good. It's fine. The only way that we get to a place where we can start to reestablish, reimagine culture is, again, to ask questions of it, to examine it, to be real honest about what we're looking at. Step 2, engage with some foundational questions that I'm excited to share with you. Step 3, apply those foundational questions and their answers in the context of a larger equation. So that equation you saw a second ago about cultural bottom line gets a little bit more complicated. As I said, I know you didn't come believing that you were going to do some math. It's only going to get a little bit more complicated. Don't worry, just follow me. Step 4, articulate an organizational legacy. Again, this is important because it takes us out of the realm of the here and now, what's good for my organization, what do we need to do to be okay, and really expands our scope to have us thinking about what power do we have to change a narrative within our larger society. Then, of course, step 5, we will identify your draft cultural bottom line. Once again, I know that in our worlds as funders, perhaps in nonprofit, we tend to be folks who really want to get the job done, and that's the pace that we work at. Part of what we have to learn when establishing culture work is that when doing culture work, we get to take our time. Reimagining a culture takes time, it takes creativity, it takes really almost an artist's brain. That's a topic for a different time. Allow yourself to take your time today. There's no shame in it. It's actually something to be celebrated. Next piece. So as promised, step 1, interrogating your current culture. So there's a lot of text here. Just follow me. We're going to do it step by step. I'd like to ask you, and this is where I start my clients each time, what is your current culture? That's a big question. I would never ask that question just on its head in that way. I'm going to walk you through how I ask folks to approach it and how I also approach it as somebody who has had to assess culture and organizations many, many times in my work. There's 6 different questions that I presented to you today. And this is not a comprehensive list of all the questions that one needs to ask to be able to establish what their current culture is. It's a sampling. It's what we're working with today, simply to give you a taste. You can ignore that underlining. That's for me. It doesn't mean anything special. I'd like for you to consider the following, and I'm going to ask you, just for time's sake, we're not going to take time for you to reflect on each one of these questions, but I'm going to ask you to choose the 2 that resonate most with you. And if I think about that even a layer deeper, what I might challenge you to do is choose a question that feels like it's easy for you to answer, and then choose a question that feels very challenging to answer. Don't run from it. Stay with it. See what comes up for you. So here are the questions that you have to choose from. Again, you're going to choose 2. Now, there's also a paragraph at the bottom of the page. I don't want you to pay any attention to that right now. We're going to get to that. Don't worry about it right now. I'm sure that 50% of you went and looked directly at it. That's okay, but it's not applicable right now. I'd like for you to consider the following, again, in the name of interrogating and then naming your current culture. First question, who and what informs the way that work happens at your organization? Something else that I practice often with clients is just taking time. I know we ain't got all the time in the world together today, but we can take our time. We can take a breath between questions. We can think. Take your time. And also, if you're a leader and you're leading these conversations, allow other people to take their time. These are big questions. Second question, what are the spoken and unspoken rules of engagement at your organization? Third question for you, what are the key patterns and habits at your organization? And I might change that word key to say, what are the promoted and accepted patterns and habits at your organization? Number 4, how do you define success organizationally, and who decided this at your organization? Fifth question, who holds the most power at your organization? Who holds the least? Why? And then last question for you. Where are conversations about DEI happening and amongst whom at your organization? Who initiates these conversations? Who is not part of these conversations? Again, why? Team, the next piece that I'm going to ask you, and this is often something that I do with the organizations that I work with, when we are asked a question, we're always going to have a relatively immediate answer. I always ask folks to think about what is a layer below that answer that you gave. Because typically if we sit on it a little bit longer, there's more that will surface. What is the layer below? So to practice today, what I'm going to give you, and I'm going to give you a couple, maybe another minute or so to reflect on this after I share this layer below challenge with you. Considering what you came up with the 2 questions that you chose to answer, I'd like for you to identify 2 members of your extended team within your organization. And I'd like for them to both be individuals that are at different levels of positional power from you and who hold different identities than you in some aspect. My question to you is, would their responses to those 2 questions that you chose be consistent with yours? And I want to invite you again, we don't get enough time to reflect when it comes to the jobs that we do, to the work that we do. I want to invite you to take 2 minutes, 2 focus minutes, to just sit with that and see what comes up. Write it down, just meditate on it, record a voice memo if that works for you. I do that often. Spend 2 minutes thinking about what is a layer below the responses that you gave. I'm timing, I promise I'm not going to leave you behind. I'll tap in with you in 2 minutes. Allow yourself 1 more minute to think. I know it can be a strange sensation when you don't have time a lot of times in your workday to think. I encourage you to push through it and really give yourself the gift of just being able to sit with some questions and see what surfaces for you. Okay, next is another poll for you, community. And the poll is this: did your interests change when you engaged with those questions from a different perspective?
Rachel, can you explain a little bit more?
Sure, I can. So when you, let me pull this back up in case that's helpful to folks. Thank you. So when I asked you to sit with those 2 questions that you chose, and then I asked you to think about that from the perspective of 2 members of your extended team, did your perspective, or excuse me, not did your perspective, what was the actual question that I asked? Did your answers change to either of those 2 questions when you thought about it from someone else's perspective, or when you attempted to think about it from someone else's perspective?
Gotcha. So did any of your responses change when you approached the question from a different perspective? And so far, we only have about a quarter of the room, so I'll let them think about it a little bit more. I like how you're giving everyone space to think.
It's
You're
important
right.
at that time. It's not easy, but we should when we can.
Yeah, we definitely don't do it enough. Right? And I'm going to give people a couple more. And Cheryl said no because she answered, or they answered in the chat. All right, we have about half of the room. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share the results so far. And that's what we have. So yes, 73% and no, 27%.
Thank you. Thank you. Whether your answer was no or yes, there's still something to celebrate. I want you to hold on to that. If your answer was no, that the answers did not change when you thought about them from someone else, or were you attempted to think about it from someone else's perspective, I want you to celebrate that. And I also want you to look alive, right? The more we go layer deeper, you may find at some point you're engaging with different perspectives that you may not hold yourself. They may be surfacing. If you said yes, there's no shame in that. It's important to sit with, and I commend you for your honesty. Not that the folks that said no are not being honest. I commend you for your honesty, and I want you to sit in that as your truth as well. There's work to be done from both of those spaces. Okay, we already did the poll. Let's shift community to, as promised, this is step 2, those foundational questions that I told you that we were going to interact with. I'd like to ask you to think about, in regard to your organization's culture, 1, what do you feel like your organization should temporarily accept? And I'll give some more context for this in a second, but I want you to hear and relate to the questions. What will your organization temporarily accept? What is your organization committed to unlearning? And what does your organization have yet to decolonize or dismantle? When I talk about temporarily accepting something, what I'm suggesting is that there's a process by which you have to acknowledge that you cannot change everything at once when you're doing culture work. As much as we would like to, as much as that might feel good, realistically, we cannot change everything. And so that means that there are some things that we will have to temporarily accept and get to another time, or get to when we have more capacity, more support, whatever the case. It's important to be able to establish what you cannot do or you're choosing not to do right now. When I talk about, when I speak about unlearning, what I want to offer to you is unlearning, for me, is a process of dislodging something that impedes our ability to move culture. It's not just forgetting. It's not just promising not to do it again, right? It's really focusing on what needs to be dislodged, as I said earlier, so that something else can take its place. Third question, what does your organization have yet to decolonize or dismantle? We talked about before, let me go back here and remind you about this resource that we have. We talk about decolonization. We're talking about resisting vestiges of colonialistic behaviors, dominator culture, paternalism, individualism. Let me make sure I'm in the right place. Okay. So what I'd like for you to do is, again, just take maybe 3 minutes. I think we're doing pretty good on time. 3 minutes to sit with these questions and just outline for yourself what your response is to each of these. Think about, from your perspective relative to your organization's current culture, what needs to be accepted, what needs to be unlearned, what do you know, but you have yet to be able to decolonize or dismantle it. 3 minutes for you, and I'll check back in with you after you've had that 3 minutes to sit and reflect. Okay, I'm going to ask you all to take maybe just another minute. Again, give yourself that space to really just sit and think. If the questions are hard, if they feel hard, they're meant to be hard, not just for the sake of them being hard, but because they're difficult questions to answer. A lot of times we have not been asked to really dive deep into what the foundations of our culture are. And so let them feel hard, push through as best you can, write down what comes to you. Doesn't have to be a fully formed thought, just attempt.
And Rachel, Ron is kind of on the same page that I am. Can you provide an example of what each might look like?
Certainly. So I was going to get to that. I don't want to taint people's thinking, but if people are helped up, I can give them some examples.
All right.
So when I think about my most recent experience being an executive director and doing fundraising, but also needing to manage program related things, one of the things I had to temporarily accept relative to especially work with my board is that as much as we may have wanted to change the breakdown of our funding, as much as we may have wanted to raise more money from folks who are less wealthy, maybe raise less money from foundations, we had to temporarily accept that for this moment, these are the relationships that we hold, and we have to make sure that we can keep our promises to community. So in summary, we had to temporarily accept that as much as we would like to diversify the culture around where we raise revenue from, in order to honor our promises to community, we had to make sure that we still move forward in the way that we had been. We didn't feel like we had the space to change course immediately, even though our goal would be to change course eventually. Temporarily, we have to accept that we need to stay on this course. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yes, thank you. That's helpful.
Okay. And so let me just continue in that vein because this is where we were going anyway. When I think about, in my experience, what my organization and in particular my board was committed to unlearning in my last experience as an executive director, we had to commit to unlearning the idea that in fundraising, we just need to raise money. It don't matter who the money comes from. It doesn't matter why it got in. It doesn't matter the route through which it came, that we just needed to be able to meet goals. That's something that came up in a very direct and profound way against our belief that racial equity also has a place in the world of fundraising. And so we needed to commit to unlearning that very quickly, completely changing our mindset around what it looks like to have racial equity be a key component of how we fundraise. Relative to this last question, what does your organization have yet to decolonize or dismantle? A key thing that we were able to identify is that our board and our staff team were in no type of relationship with each other. The board really existed as this body that is to be pleased, to be catered to seek approval from, and our staff team is there to do that bidding. One of the things that we identified that would be critical in changing the culture within our region within the organization is to be able to say, we're doing the same work. We are part of the same team. We just are doing different parts of the work within that larger work. And so we need to decolonize this idea that the folks who have the most money should have the most power and the most influence and have the say and dominion over the folks who are not giving money. And so again, these are questions that I have had to ask myself many times, which is why I know that they're important. I ask myself these questions constantly as an executive director, and it helped me to be able to establish, okay, so where is this team going? What is our cultural bottom line, which is where we're going in just a second. But what is not working? What needs to be accepted, unlearned, decolonized, so that we can establish very specifically what is going to be unacceptable for us moving forward relative to culture. Now, we could have said that we need to be focused on getting more folks of color on the board. We need to be focused on retaining those folks, right? A lot of the things that we talk about often in the world of DEI, that's fine. But if we're not stopping to think about how did these mindsets get in this place in the first place? How did these mindsets arrive at our team in the first place? we're not actually doing the work of cultural reimagination, and we're likely skipping steps. Okay. This is our second to last piece before we get to, or actually our last piece before we get to actually drafting out that cultural bottom line. Legacy is a key part of culture from where I sit. And I don't know that that's something that everyone is talking about, and it's okay if they're not. It's something that I'd like to ask you and invite you to consider. When we talk about legacy relative to culture, we're really establishing that what we build and what we set as a foundation has a lot to do with, yes, our organization and how our organization operates today, but it also has a lot to do with what our society looks like later on. And so I ask organizational clients to sit with not just what needs to change, what can you identify right now as challenging or working, but also how does what you do today culturally impact tomorrow? And so the questions that I ask folks to sit with often are these 5. I'll give you a little bit of time to sit with these, but I know that we're running short on time, so we won't stay here too long. How will your organization's efforts contribute to DEI advancement in a way that will matter to society? What is the work that your organization does for societal and global benefit? Where is your organization willing to set aside its capitalistic best interests in order to pursue DEI outcomes? Where is your organization uniquely qualified to deliver impact relative to DEI? And how will the sector that your organization occupies look fundamentally different regarding DEI in 1 year, 5 years, 25 years? Now, if the last questions, the questions up until this point felt difficult, I'm certain that these feel difficult as well. And again, a promise to you is the only reason that I know to ask these questions is because I have asked myself these same questions many, many, many times in nonprofit spaces, in my space now as Culture Kinesis. They're critical questions to be asking. Culture is about so much more than just what happens on our team within our spaces. We have the opportunity to impact sectors, societies, and so it behooves us to think about things from this perspective as well. So I'm going to ask you to take just a minute. Again, we're running short on time. Just a minute to sit with one of these questions. Choose the one that feels hardest to you. Just sit with it for a minute and see what surfaces for you. It doesn't have to be a complete sentence. It doesn't have to be something that makes complete sense. Just see what comes up for you, because again, it's a beginning of a process of starting to ask yourself these big questions, not just moving to action, which a lot of times is what DEI tells us. We got to move, we got to focus on retention, we got to focus on recruitment, we got to make sure we get more folks that look like these folks in the door, when really I think, yes, that's important, but first we have to stop and think about how are those actions going to affect later? Why is that even important to us? And how are we going to impact that culturally for the rest of time, hopefully? So 1 minute, I'll tap in with you then and we'll move on to the next part of our conversation. All right, community. Last piece, we're at step 5. And actually, before we get to step 5, I won't read this because again, we're short on time. As I promised you, I have yet to present anything to you that is not something that I have done in my practice as a leader or in my work currently. I took those questions that I asked you, came up with answers to those questions, and then established for myself, what is my legacy statement around how I want to impact culture moving forward? I encourage you to do this as an individual because I think it's valuable. I also encourage you to think about this relative to your organization. In the context of today's conversation, I'm suggesting that you think about this for your organization. What legacy do you want your organization to leave culturally? So I'll leave it here for just a second. You have these on the slides, you have the entire presentation, but in case you want to just take in some pieces of it, I'll leave it up for a second. and then we'll move to our final step in the process of establishing a cultural bottom line. Take just a minute. Okay. So team, this is the last. We're in the final stretch. We're finally at this place where we can stop and say, this is what it looks like to draft our cultural bottom line. Now, as promised, everything that we talked about over the course of this conversation builds to this place. Don't be alarmed. Don't be frustrated if you don't have answers to a lot of those questions that you were asked. It's simply an exercise. This is another part of the exercise. These processes take a lot of time. The goal here was to give you an appetizer, to get you started thinking about these things, not to come away with something that's complete and wrapped up and ready to go. It's a beginning to a process. So when I think about what it means to establish a bottom line relative to culture, here's what I'm looking at. What you named as your current culture, plus what you identified that your organization commits to unlearning, minus what your organization will temporarily accept, right? That means that you're not going to necessarily move the needle on that cultural fixture. You're going to leave it alone for right now. Minus what you have identified that you have yet, what you have identified, but you have yet to successfully decolonize. So let me give you a second to take that in. I'm going to put that in the context of the examples that I just gave you in just a moment, but I want you to take in the relationship between these things. What is your culture now? What are you unlearning? What will you temporarily accept? What have you identified but have not yet successfully been able to decolonize or dismantle? And that's what we will call your cultural bottom line. Just checking time. Excuse me. Okay. When I put the examples that I gave you into the context of this equation of sorts, again, it's not math, it's definitely not precise math, but it's an illustration of relationships. When I think about what I establish as a cultural bottom line based on those examples, based on my experiences, these are the pieces that I laid out. Now, I'm not going to talk these through because the exact same thing is on the next slide, but I want you to see how there's an answer for each spot that will then become a statement on the next slide. So I'll go into detail on the next slide. But I took each one of these things, current culture, again, what we unlearn, what we temporarily accept, what we've identified but have yet to successfully decolonize, and I substituted in the answers to the questions from my reflection from before. I then took these pieces and I put them into a statement. This statement is important because I can use this as a guide for myself, for my team, to hold us deeply accountable to what it looks like to hold a bottom line relative to culture. A lot of us, again, because I know we're a nonprofit, we're working in funding in some capacity, we're always thinking about numbers, we're always thinking about revenue. We don't play when it comes to saying this is the bottom line. We have to raise this amount of money, we have to give away this amount of money. We don't play relative to that. I want to encourage you and challenge you to take the same exact approach to what it looks like to establish a culture and say, we don't play relative to this culture. This is where we want to end up. So all of the things that I shared with you, I took them out of that equation and put them into a statement that I can use to keep myself honest around this cultural reimagination work. So what I outlined, again, from my past experience, this year, we will continue to prioritize learning and growth within our team. And we will consistently challenge harmful social narratives and practices in ways that will encourage and inspire our peers. We will become dedicated students of our own and other institutions, past and present. We commit to unlearning our reliance upon a handful of funding institutions and wealthy white donors to deliver on our promises to communities. We will temporarily accept that we need to continue many of these relationships for the time being. We have identified that the lack of integration between the board and staff teams reinforces toxic power dynamics, and we will not end the year without having established a new way of working. Now, We could have approached this, I could have approached this from a perspective of, well, we don't have this many people of color on our board, so we need to change that. We need to make sure that we are raising X amount of money from these different populations. We could do that. But ultimately, again, what that doesn't establish for us is the mindsets that get us to this place and the structures that have allowed us to operate this way for some time. We have to first identify what is no longer acceptable, and then we work to do the work to solve for it through various DEI initiatives. But we first have to be able to establish what is the culture that we want to see. Write it out, be specific about it, return to it often. And then once we've done that, we can start doing the work to establish what do we do now. We have to be able to articulate what our reimagined culture looks like. So team, quick poll, because I have probably about 2 minutes left. Very quick poll. When you think about your draft cultural bottom line, based on these pieces outlined, and again, I know this was quick, so bear with me, what you would name as your current culture, what your organization commits to unlearning, what your organization will temporarily accept, and what you have identified as a challenge but have yet to successfully decolonize. Where does that leave you? Does that leave you in a net negative or a net positive space? Again, you don't know for sure, right? It's not precise math, but if you were to think about your answer from before and then think about these questions that have been added in for you, do you feel like you end up in a net negative or net positive space?
Just so you know, Rachel, kind of in the background, I've been kind of answering a question around color versus culture. And I'm not sure if this person might be from a different country. So, because I don't think that you've mentioned color. So I was just saying to the person that we're talking about culture, not color. And I think sometimes people find that hard to kind of separate. For some reason, it feels like only when you're of color you have culture, maybe. I'm not sure where they're coming from, but I just wanted to be clear that you're talking about culture.
Thank you for that clarification. That's exactly what I'm talking about. And, you know, we all use different terms for things. So some folks might say color, some folks may say race. You know, people talk about that differently. It does, but to echo the point that you made, again, and going back to what I said in the beginning, culture exists everywhere. Every single body of folks have culture in some capacity. Every workplace has a culture that may or may not be determined solely by folks' race, folks' religion, whatever the case. Culture exists everywhere.
Okay, thank you. All right, we're at about a little over half the room, so I'm going to go ahead and close and share. And here are our results. So pretty even.
I love it. And I would have loved it if it was flipped. I would have loved it if one was much, you know, significantly higher than the other. My goal is not for you to be in any particular place necessarily. Again, this is not precise math, which is what makes culture work hard. I think a lot of times in the way that we work, we're dealing with numbers, we're dealing with very precise things. We can't do that relative to culture. It is inherently something that is not easy to put one's finger on. And yet the answer itself, whether it is negative, positive, somewhere in the middle, tells us how we need to move to some degree. Alrighty. I think there actually is one more poll. And the last poll that I have for you all, community, is when you think about that answer that you just gave, net negative or net positive, I want you to call back in. This was a while ago, but I want you to call back in those two folks that I asked you to be focused on way back here. Those two members of your extended team that are at different levels of positional power than you, who hold different identities from you. Would their response at the end of all of this, do you think their response would be consistent with yours? Again, there is no right or wrong answer. This is really for you to be able to say, where do I feel like my organization is at? across folks, not just based on what I think, but what might others say as well, because that's
So
also
Rachel, the question is, with my new cultural bottom line, if I think I'm at net negative, positive, neutral, would
Mhm.
those two people agree or not agree?
Exactly. Thank you.
Perfect. All right, we got people answering. And while they're answering, I'm just going to go ahead and ask one of these questions. Jeannie wants to know, is positional power defined as a negative element in workplace culture or a logical place to look for toxicity?
That's a really fascinating question. Can you say the second part again, as a logical place to?
Or a logical place to look for toxicity?
I think there's a couple ways to answer that question. I don't see it as negative. I just simply see it as fact. I'm glad you asked the question, and I don't see negativity in it. What I do see is an opportunity for us to be really honest about the fact that within a space, our institutions are built for some people to have more power granted within their role than for other people to have. That being said, if we're establishing that we want cultures where there's shared leadership, or we want cultures where equity exists, we have to reconcile what it looks like to have workplaces where some people have an immense amount of power and some people have limited power. And then I think we have to reconcile, what does it look like to allow folks that have limited power still to be able to have a say in what the culture is within an organization? So I think it's data, not positive or negative necessarily. That's for an organization to determine, but I think that it's important data for you to think about and be focused on.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm going to go ahead and share the results.
Excellent. Okay, so there was some shift, and I like to see that. Again, I celebrate it because ultimately that's that layer deeper that I was talking about. When we ask ourselves, what do we think? And then we ask ourselves, not because we know what other people think, we don't know, but we ask ourselves, based on what I know about the power that someone else holds, based on what I know about their experience, based on what they told me, or what I observe is likely their experience, would they say the same thing about the culture here? And if the answer is no, then we have more work to do to examine what's there. There's more for us to ask and to inquire about. Community, that was our last poll. We did a lot today. And I know, again, those are some big, beefy questions, and I appreciate you rocking with me and just working through them and allowing yourself some time. It's a gift to give yourself to just be able to sit and reflect. I appreciate you for being courageous enough to sit in those questions. Last thing I have to share with you before we move to the official, I believe, question and answer section. I'd love for you to keep in touch with me. You can learn about the services that Culture Kinesis provides at culturekinesis.com/services. You can always schedule a complimentary discovery call with me on my website at culturekinesis.com/contact. We're on Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. So I'd also love for you to keep in touch with us there. And again, I can't see you. I wish I could. I'm sure you all are so lovely. I can't see you, but I'm so thankful to have been able to share some thoughts with you all. And I pray that they have been helpful to you and that you could take away at least one thing that sets you on your journey in a different way to start to think a layer below about culture and really think about not just strategies and actions, but what is the culture that you desire and how do you reimagine what you already have to be what it is that you'd like to have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And I'm just going to leave your slide up for a sec while I try to read this very long question. Kai says, I'm finding this interesting and challenging to reflect from both internal to the org, where I think we are doing moderately well, and with our constituency and field, where I think we can improve greatly. Should I continue to try holding and working on these together, or should I consider them separately?
I love these questions. These are amazing questions. I also want you all to know I can't see myself, so if I'm making a face, it's not about your question, it's my thinking face. I like to talk with folks a lot about locus of control because that matters a lot. So when we talked previously about what you will temporarily accept and what you will unlearn, right? I think that question gets at some of what you're asking. Within a larger sector, there are more people, there are more influences, there's likely more power at play. doesn't mean that you can't have influence in that space. I think what I might ask you to think about is, how do you identify in both the internal space that you're in and also in external spaces, what is the locus of power that you have? Because I think when we focus on not how much power do I have in a space, but where do I have power, then that tells us what actions we can take. So when we talked about at the beginning, I'll say this quickly, I offered you some small things that you can do, small cultural fixtures that can change something. In a space where you feel like you have a limited locus of control or power, you may still be able to say, you know what, team, I think that we should start every meeting that we have with some cultural tenets or with some agreements. Or I think that every meeting that we start, it would be valuable for us to do some conceptual alignment so we all know that we're on the same page. I resonate deeply with what you're saying, and I don't want to project my own experience on what it is that you're talking about. It can be so challenging to feel like what you are doing within your internal space is having impact on a larger scale. And I promise you that it is. Part of what I think we have to learn is that when we're doing that work internally, we have a responsibility to tell the story in other spaces and say, this is what we're doing here, this is how we're pushing, and then challenge other people to do the same thing. But in summary, I would ask you to focus and be really clear about where you have power in a space and start there and gradually push for your power to expand. But it's not a yes or no power thing. Think about where you do have power and focus there.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And you're getting a lot of, thank you, something to consider, excellent. I think another comment I wanted to share was, I'm taking these back to my team. Victoria said about the foundational questions, these are such great questions to consider. So you're getting a lot of great feedback. I know this is a little different for people, so I'm glad that they're getting it, that there's some reflection and some kind of taking back that will have to happen. It's not just like, okay, plug this in and you're done. So I'm glad people are getting that.
Glad that onto it too. It can be difficult to grasp, and
Yeah,
lost on me. But I had faith in this community. I didn't know them, but I had faith that they would meet me here.
yes, thank you. So you have a Rachel, another Rachel in the audience who says, if you feel like those people in lower positions would agree, but those in higher positions wouldn't, how do you bring honesty and reflection to them or bring them along?
I think that I also love this question. I think that our tendency a lot of times is to say, well, how do we so let me just use the example that I presented of my staff team and the board that I was working with at that time. I think a lot of folks' tendency is to say, we have to get the folks who have less power, less positional power, more comfortable with the folks who have more positional power. I'm always thinking about how you interrupt power dynamics in a very, lack of a better word, a very aggressive way, not aggressive in terms of approach, but aggressive in like, I mean it type of way. And the way that I might approach that is, let's deal with the folks who have the most positional power. And let's think about with them what it looks like to get them to a place where they are clear about the benefit of shared leadership, where they are clear about the fact that them holding power comes with significant responsibility. So I hope that this is answering your question. I got excited and I may have gone to the left unintentionally. I would say focus where the power is, and also focus on the empowerment of your team, right? One of the things that was one of the greatest joys of my experience in being an executive director was that I got to create opportunities for my staff team to be able to interface in spaces where they would not have had the opportunity had that lane not been created. So for example, I had folks on my staff team leading board meetings. I had them leading task forces within the board. And I would always be present, but I was not always facilitating because I needed my board to understand these folks are brilliant. Half the time, no disrespect or shade, but they know more than you about what it is that's being talked about. A lot of times they know more than me. And so I think I'm maybe changing my answer and trying to be very specific. Create opportunities where you have the positional power to do that, to help bring folks into spaces where they would not ordinarily be asked to be, because you can help, I think, build their power and influence simply by opening a door and creating a lane, because you have the positional power. If you feel like you do, you have the positional power to do that. If you do not feel like you have the positional power, then I think my ask of you is to think about who does and who can be an ally to you as you try to create those inroads for other folks. I think that positional power conversations are about people moving toward one another, which contradicts what I said at the beginning, but I changed my mind. They're about folks moving toward one another. Everybody needs to move in some particular way. How do we create opportunities for folks to step into power? And how do we also create opportunities and expectation that folks relinquish power at the same time?
Thank you, Rachel. And you got some more. I just want to read one of these comments. Thanks for holding space. This is from EPOW. Thanks for holding this space, giving us time, space to reflect on our own locus of power and where we can influence the space. So, wanted to shout that out. And then a question from, this was a very early on question, so I want to make sure we get it. Allison had a couple of questions. Do you have advice for handling staff who are well-intentioned but create activating situations by bringing up a lot of intense topics during DEI conversations?
Yep, also an important question. I didn't catch the name of this individual, but I am speaking directly to you, a community member who I appreciate. I would love for you to schedule time with me and we can literally talk that through. I offer, as I said, a complimentary discovery session. If you'd like to have 45 minutes of thought partnership to talk that through, I'd be so happy to do that with you. Those are some of my favorite conversations. We didn't talk about this in today's session, but so much of, I feel, culture building is really about relationships. Oftentimes, I think folks, and I can't speak for this person, I don't know them, of course, I don't know the context, and you know that. When folks are asked, so let me speak about, thinking about myself as a Black woman in spaces earlier in my career where I had very limited positional power and I did not feel heard often. The point at which somebody asked me a question about how I felt, you better believe I was going to tell them, I was going to give them the answer. And it may not have been presented in the way that somebody wanted to hear or that felt comfortable for that person, for other people. And so what I'll offer is, I think, yes, it can, people's emotions and kind of raw feelings about things can derail agendas relative to DEI conversations. This is, I think, one of the primary reasons why I encourage people not to jump directly into DEI training, because a lot of times what happens is that there's not been enough of that dialogue where people have an opportunity to voice how they feel in a different space before you get to the DEI training. And then because this is the only space that they've had to express how they feel, they take it as they should because somebody asked. And so for me, this feels like actually a good example of why we need to be cautious, and not the word I'm looking for, but we need to be intentional about when we open up space for a large organization-wide conversation, how do we expect people to interact in that space? Would it be better for us to do the work of reimagining what it looks like to communicate about hard things before we actually go into the space and need to do the communication?
Thank you. I immediately read that question and thought about the kind of the re-traumatizing that happens when people decide, Leah, let's have this conversation. And maybe I don't want to talk about that today, and maybe the people who feel most, vulnerable in those moments, just don't want to have those conversations sometimes. And it really does feel like it can be a little bit re-traumatizing. So thank you for your answer there. Let's
Can I
see
do
what.
one more very quick thing?
Yes,
If
of course.
I know you have other questions. I think also we forget a lot of times, and that's where these questions around, what are the norms in your workplace? What are the patterns and habits in your workplace are really important, because ultimately there are worlds in which I've seen it happen many times where the way that I might communicate as a Black woman in a space would not necessarily be off-putting to other Black people, right? Black people are not monolithic, but would not be off-putting to other folks, but it might be off-putting to someone who has a very different racial identity from me. there's work that we could have done before we got to the DEI training to establish, this is how I communicate. This is my intention when I communicate in this way. This is what it looks like when I don't want to communicate. Yvonne, to your point, when I'm done, when I'm fatigued. But if we wait till we get into open space and open water to have that conversation, all that comes up, and then we have to deal with it in that space when we could have eased into it more intentionally.
Thank you so much for adding that. Bridget wants to know, what does CK's cultural tenet of move up mean?
Yeah, I should have talked about that one. I'm really glad that you asked. I should have talked about that because that's not super apparent either. So that's not actually mine, and I should have credited who I got it from. I will do that in the future. So you may have heard of step up, step back, which is the one that I'm most familiar with. Move up suggests that it's not wherever you fall, someone who contributes a lot, someone who doesn't contribute a lot, neither one is bad, neither one is negative, but everybody should be challenging themselves to move in a new way in conversations. And so move up is saying, if you are somebody who tends to be more reserved and says less, move up and say more, because we want to hear your wisdom. We want to benefit from your brilliance. If you are somebody who tends to take up more space and has a lot to say, move up in a different way and allow other people space to share their wisdom and brilliance as well. And let's also still make sure we hear from you. It's a play on step up, step back.
Thanks so much. I'm going to pose this question, then I'll let people know what's going on for Candid next. So the question is, do you have advice for how to engage employees in a large agency, so 600 staff, several sites, 2 states, just very large? While you think about that, I'll just let people know that our next webinar is June 30th, and it's all about the development teams or the outward-facing staff being able to initiate or manage relationships with individual donors. So we're talking about how to increase your access points, traffic, and conversion rate. But back to the question, Rachel. Yeah, how do we engage these large, really large places that are spread out?
Yeah, it's tough. It's not easy to do. I think that what you may have to do in a setting where it is a large team, not even have to do. I think what you should think about is when you have a team that is large and separated, at the end of the day, when everybody is not occupying a particular container together, you're going to be dealing with multiple cultures. And so I think there's a conversation that probably needs to happen on multiple fronts. There's a conversation about what are the subcultures that exist. So like for this regional team, perhaps, or for this, this particular fundraising team or whatever, like what are the subcultures that exist? What is the intended culture that's supposed to be umbrella across these subcultures? And I think I might start with an assessment of, based on the culture that was, if it's been said and named, based on the culture that is the goal, how are these subcultures in relationship with that larger culture? Because I think that will give you a lot of data about, one, how consistent cultures are across the team, but 2, how much environment impacts culture. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there. How much your environment impacts culture and how much it deviates from what has been established as the desired culture for the whole. I think you have to take it in pieces and bites.
Thank you, appreciate it. LaShawn says, in our community, it's proving to be slow work to assess and address culture and strategy in the workplace in equitable ways. What is a reasonable approach to the weight as those in positional power face discomfort, even talking about DEI and then learn and unlearn?
Yep. I apologize for my faces. I'm not good at controlling my faces, and that one was a face of resonance and in my own way, feeling like I understand that piece. I think that part of what I talked about in the beginning, Culture Kinesis as a dandelion and the process of cultivating and encouraging weeds, right, in these gardens of the status quo. I think we have to accept a lot of times, like, again, talking about temporarily accepting that this is long work. It can be long work. I think that we have to think about, in particular, I will go out on a limb and say folks of color have to think about what emotional labor are we willing to do to help shift cultures within organizations. because that comes into play. I also think that we have to be willing to say, I'm gonna plant this idea, I'm gonna always speak on it, especially when I'm somebody who has positional power. I'm gonna always speak on it, and I'm gonna always make sure that this is said in the rooms that I'm in, even though I recognize that it may not change. One thing. I think the second thing is we have to, I want to be thoughtful about the language that I use. I think we have to, I don't want to say exercise patience, because some situations just don't require patience. I think that we need to push for things. I think that we also, part of the pushing and part of the influence has to be holding our leaders to account and holding feet to the fire and saying, so this is what I hear you saying. I hear you saying that equity is important to you. I hear you saying that diversity is important to you. Here's the action that I'm seeing. And so can you speak on whether or not this is important to you? I think a lot of the questions that we ask today are questions that can and should be posed to leadership, right? What are you willing to give up so that we can get to this higher plane, so that we can get to the next place of equity, of diversity, of inclusion? And then be willing to sit back and listen to what people say, because a lot of times what we can glean from their responses is, this is actually not very important to them. And then we have to make our decisions about how much on an organizational level we participate in spaces where folks have made it very clear that that is not as important to them as they would like to believe.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Anna says, I'm struggling with the idea of understanding how to balance keeping the organization moving forward to keep our services in action while also creating systemic cultural change. Seems impossible to do both and really make change. What do you think?
I feel you. I feel you 100%. I cannot believe it to be impossible, because I don't want it to believe it to be impossible. And I also want to validate what you're saying, and that it so often feels so impossible. And this is where I think the locus of control piece comes in. But I think also I need to find a better word than patience, because if somebody told me as a Black woman to be patient about equity, I might cause them harm. I don't want to suggest that that's the way that we should approach things. But in the way that I said, the things that we deal with today are centuries entrenched. We have to recognize that the powers that be are not going to readily let go of these things. They're not going to readily let go of power. And so much of this work around cultural reimagination is asking folks to develop an intrinsic motivation to want to see something change. And I think that that's actually the root of so much of our challenge. Folks and organizations are shifting the way that they talk about things, shifting their goals around culture, because a defining moment happened for them in 2020. And what I always want to ask people when they bring that to me is, why did it take until 2020 for you to understand that there was a challenge? There was a challenge long before that. And so I think, to directly answer your question, so much of this work of cultural reimagination is a process of, as I said, unlearning and re-education, which a lot of times in our capitalistic construction, we ain't got time for. And so I hear you, I feel you. This is what has to be reconciled. Do we love capitalism and progress more than we love culture? And if so, then we need to say that, not be okay with it necessarily, but say that so we understand the container that we're in.
Rachel, as always, it is a pleasure to have you with us, and we can't wait to have you again. Thank you so much. I also want to thank everyone who attended today's webinar. We appreciate you taking time out of your day. If you like this webinar, we hope you'll join us again soon. Again, thank you, Rachel, and everyone have a great rest of your day.